Little introduction and insight into science fiction tales in general. So hang on, this one's called, and it's only a few minutes long, really. It's called Flame Down by F.E. Fife. Charlie Holmes lost touch with reality amid rending and shattering sounds that lingered dimly. Blackness engulfed him in a wave of agony. He was not sure exactly when the possibility of opening his eyes occurred to him. Vaguely, Charlie could sense. Remember was too definite. He could sense much tugging and hauling upon his supine body. It doubtless seemed justifiable, but he flinched from recalling more clearly which must have been so extremely unpleasant. Gently now, Charlie tried rolling his head a few inches right and then left. When it hurt only 1/10 as much as he feared, he let his eyes open. "Hello," rasped the bulbous creature, squatting beside his pallet. Charlie shut his eyes quickly and very tightly. Something with a dampish, spongy tip, probably one of the grape-red tentacles he had glimpsed, prodded his shoulder. "Hello," insisted the scratchy voice. Charlie peeped warily as was trapped at it, and opened his eyes resignedly. "Where the hell am I?" Charlie inquired. It sounded very trite, even in his confused condition. Sections of the dark red skin before him, especially on the barrel-shaped belly, quivered as he spoke. "Surely," grated the remarkable voice, "you remember something, no?" I remember the crash," gasped Charlie, sitting up abruptly. He held his breath, waiting the knifing pain it seemed natural to expect. When he felt none, he cautiously fingered his ribs, and then a horrid thought prompted him to wiggle his bare toes. But everything seemed to be in place. Charlie lay in a small room on a thin pallet of furs. Floor and walls of slick ochre clay reflected the bright outside light pouring through a wide doorway. What's with all the sand?" Charlie demanded, squinting at the heat waves outside. "Do you not recognize it? Look again, Earthman." Earthman, thought Charlie. Oh, it must be real. I can still see him. Oh, what a whack on the head I must have got. "You are in pain?" asked the creature solicitously. No, I can't remember the crash, and then... "Ah, yes. You have not been conscious for some time." His reddish host rippled upward to stand more or less erect upon 3 thick tentacles. "Even with us, memory is slow after shock, and you may be uneasy in the lighter gravity." Lighter gravity, reflected Charlie. This can only mean Mars. Sure, that must be it. I was piloting a rocket, and I cracked up somewhere on Mars. This felt right to him, and Charlie decided the rest of his memory would return. "Are you able to rise, Earthman?" asked the other, extending a helpful tentacle. The Earthman managed to haul himself stiffly to his feet. "Say, my name is Holmes," he introduced himself dizzily. "I am Koteki, in your language learned years since from the other spacemen. I might say, Fiery Canal Man." "Huh, has to be Mars," muttered Charlie under his breath. "What a bump on my head. When can you show me what's left of my ship?" "There will be no time for that," answered the Martian. Bunches of small muscles twitched here and there across the front of his round, pudgy head. Charlie was getting used to the single eye, half the size of an orange and not much duller. With imagination, the various lumps and organs surrounding it might be considered a face. "The priestess here will lead the crowd," predicted Ko. "They know I took an Earthman, and I fear they have finished with the others." "Finished with what?" demanded the Earthman, shaking his head in hopes of clearing it enough to figure out what was going on. "It has been an extremely dry season, you see." Ko rippled his tentacles and moved lissomely to the doorway, assuming a grotesquely furtive posture as he peered out. "The people are maddened by the drought. They will be roused to sacrifice you to the canal guards, like the others who survived." "Canal guards?" croaked Charlie. "This can't be right. I don't want to be sacrificed. Aren't you civilized here? I can't be the only Earthman they've ever seen." "It is true that Earthmen are perfectly safe at most times. But the laws, the Earth Ko snapped the tip of a tentacle at him. "The canals are low, you see. You can feel the heat and dryness for yourself, can't you? The crowds are inflamed by temple prophecies, and then your ship flaming down from the skies. He snapped all his tentacle tips at once. From somewhere outside, a threatening murmur became audible. It was an unholy blend of rasping shouts and shriller chanting, punctuated by notes of brassy gongs. As Charlie listened, the volume rose noticeably. Kayaker reached out with one tentacle and wrapped 6 inches about the Earthman's wrist. When he plunged through the doorway, Charlie perforce went right with him. Whipping around the corner of the hut, he had time for a quick squint at the chanters. Ko alone had looked weirdly alien. 200 just like him. Well, led by a dozen bulgy figures in streaming robes, masked and decorated in brass, the natives were swarming over the sand toward the fugitives. They had evidently been busy, and above a distant cluster of low buildings, a column of smoke spiraled upward suggestively. Kayaker led the way at a flowing gallop over the sandstone and down a long slope toward what looked like this junction of 2 gullies, dragging Charlie with him. "The canal! With luck, we may find a boat." A frenzied scream went up as the mob topped the ridge and regained sight of them. Charlie, having all he could do to breathe in the thin air, tried to shake his wrist loose. Now that they were descending the slope, he saw where the water was. They slid down a 4-foot drop in a cloud of fine, choking dust and were faced by several punt-like craft stranded on the mudflat below. The water was 50 feet further. "We should have gone further downstream," said Ko, "but we can wade." Their momentum carried them several steps into the mud before Charlie realized how wrong that was. And then as they floundered about again to regain the solid bank, it became apparent that they would never reach it in time. "They are catching us," rasped out Kayaker. And indeed, the howling crowd was scarcely 100 yards away now. The heat waves shimmered above the reddish desert until the Martians were blurred before Charlie's burning eyes. His feet churned the clinging mud, and he felt as if he were running in a dream. "I'm sorry you're in it too, though." "Oh, it does not matter. I act as I must." The Earthman rubbed sweat from his eyes and with the back of a muddy hand. "Everything's wrong. I still can't remember cracking up the ship. Why did I always want to be a rocket pilot?" "Well, I made my bed." The oncoming figures wavered and blurred in the heat. Ko emitted a grating sound reminiscent of an earthly chuckle. "As do all you mortals. Yes, you made your bed and now you finally have to lie in it." "I will tell you now, since I can carry this episode a little farther. You have never piloted a spaceship." Charlie gaped at him incredulously. Well, what about the wreck?" "It was a truck that hit you, Charlie Holmes. You have no more sense than to be crossing the street with your nose in a magazine just purchased on the corner." With some dull, creeping, semi-detached facet of his mind, Charlie noticed that the running figures still floated above the sand without actually drawing near. "Are you? Do you mean I'm dead?" "Yes, of course you are," grated Ko amiably. "And in view of certain actions during your life, there will be quite a period of, shall we say, probation. When I was assigned to you, your reading habits suggested an amusing series of variations. You cannot know how dull it is to keep frustrating the same old dreams." "Amusing," repeated Charlie, beyond caring with the whimper in his tone. The mob was dissolving into thin smoke. The horizon was shrinking to nothing. Kayaker himself was altering now into something redder of skin, but equipped with a normal number of limbs, discounting the barbed tail. The constant heat of the desert. Yes, the desert was it began at last to seem explicable. Unending heat, burning hot. Yes. For me, Charlie Holmes, this is a great amusement. Displaying hideous tusks, Ko grinned. "Next time, I'll be a Venusian." "Not a Martian like this time, a Venusian, I think, yes. And you, Charlie Holmes, will lose again. And then we can visit other planets and stars. Oh, yes, Charlie Holmes, you and I will be seeing a lot of each other." He cheerfully polished one horn with a clawed finger. "And I promise you will not enjoy it." Ah, yes, the dangers of reading science fiction. Get your nose in fantasy sci-fi mag and get hit by a truck. Anyway, the cheap warm-up act is over, and now the main attraction begins. Kayaker magic with the 7th voyage from the book The Star Diaries of Stanislaw Lem. And I'll throw a link in chat here in just a sec that you can read along if you like.
Oh, good. I was going to share that link. Going by, but this may take longer than I expected, so I'm going to get started even if I don't see the link.
Yeah, I got to shift screens for me just half a second. It'll be there in a second.
The 7th voyage, it's from the book The Star Diaries, which is sort of the voyages of a character named Ejon Tichy. And it starts, it was on a Monday, April 2nd. I was cruising in the vicinity of Betelgeuse when a meteor no larger than a lima bean pierced the hull, shattered the drive regulator and part of the rudder, as a result of which the rocket lost all maneuverability. I put on my spacesuit, went outside, and tried to fix the mechanism, but found I couldn't possibly attach the spare rudder, which I'd had the foresight to bring along, without the help of another man. The constructors had foolishly designed the rocket in such a way that it took one person to hold the head of the bolt in place with a wrench and another to tighten the nut. I didn't realize this at first and spent several hours trying to grip the wrench with my feet while using both hands to screw on the nut at the other end. But I was getting nowhere and had already missed lunch. Then finally, just as I almost succeeded, the wrench popped out from under my feet and went flying off into space. So not only had I accomplished nothing, but I lost a valuable tool besides. I watched helplessly as it sailed away, growing smaller and smaller against the starry sky. After a while, the wrench returned in an elongated ellipse, but although it had now become a satellite of the rocket, it never got close enough for me to retrieve it. I went back inside and, sitting down to a modest supper, considered how best to extricate myself from this stupid situation. Meanwhile, the ship flew on, straight ahead, its velocity steadily increasing. Since my drive regulator, too, had been knocked out by that blasted meteor, it's true there were no heavenly bodies on course, but this headlong flight could hardly continue indefinitely. For a while I contained my anger, but then discovered, when starting to wash the dinner dishes, that the now overheated atomic pile had ruined my very best cut of sirloin. I'd been keeping it in the freezer for Sunday. I momentarily lost my usually level head, burst into a volley of the vilest oaths, and smashed a few plates. This did give me a certain satisfaction, but was hardly practical. In addition, the sirloin, which I threw overboard, instead of drifting off into the void, didn't seem to want to leave the rocket and revolved around it, a second artificial satellite, which produced a brief eclipse of the sun every 11 minutes and 4 seconds. To calm my nerves, I calculated until evening the components of its trajectory, as well as the orbital perturbation caused by the presence of the lost wrench. I figured out that for the next 6 million years, the sirloin, rotating about the ship in a circular path, would lead the wrench, then catch up with it from behind and pass it again. Finally, exhausted by these computations, I went to bed in the middle of the night. I had the feeling someone was shaking me by the shoulder. I opened my eyes and saw a man standing over the bed. His face was strangely familiar, though I hadn't the faintest idea who this could be. "Get up," he said, "and take the pliers. We're going out and screwing on the rudder bolts." "First of all, your manner is somewhat unceremonious, and we haven't even been introduced," I replied. "And secondly, I know for a fact that you aren't there. I'm alone on this rocket and have been now for 2 years, en route from Earth to the constellation of the Ram. Therefore, you are a dream and nothing more." However, he continued to shake me, repeating that I should go with him at once and get the tools. "This is idiotic," I said, growing annoyed, because this dream argument could very well wake me up, and I knew from experience the difficulty I would have getting back to sleep. "Look, I'm not going anywhere. There's no point in it. A bolt tightened in a dream won't change things as they are in the sober light of day. Now kindly stop pestering me and evaporate, or leave in some other fashion. Otherwise, I might awake." "But you are awake, word of honor," cried the stubborn apparition. "Don't you recognize me? Look here." And saying this, he pointed to the 2 warts, big as strawberries, on his left cheek. Instinctively, I clutched my own face, for yes, I had 2 warts exactly the same and in that very place. Suddenly I realized why this phantom reminded me of someone I knew. He was the spitting image of myself. "Leave me alone, for heaven's sake," I cried, shutting my eyes, anxious to stay asleep. "If you are me, then fine, we needn't stand on ceremony, but it only proves you don't exist." With which I turned over on my other side and pulled the covers over my head. I could hear him saying something about utter nonsense. Then finally, when I didn't respond, he shouted, "You'll regret this, knucklehead, and you'll find out too late that this was not a dream." But I didn't budge. In the morning I opened my eyes and immediately recalled that curious nocturnal episode. Sitting up in bed, I thought about what strange tricks the mind can play, for here, without a single fellow creature on board, and confronted with an emergency of the most pressing kind, I had, as it were, split myself in 2 in that dream fantasy to answer the needs of the situation. After breakfast, discovering that the rocket had acquired an additional chunk of acceleration during the night, I took to leafing through the ship's library, searching the textbooks for some way out of this predicament, but I didn't find a thing. So I spread my star map out on the table, and in the light of nearby Betelgeuse, obscured every so often by the orbiting sirloin, examined the area in which I was located for the seat of some cosmic civilization that might possibly come to my aid. But unfortunately, this was a complete stellar wilderness, avoided by all vessels as a region unusually dangerous, for in it lay gravitational vortices, as formidable as they were mysterious, 147 of them in all, whose existence was explained by 6 astrophysical theories, each theory saying something different. The Cosmonautical Almanac warned of them in view of the incredible relativistic effects that passage through a vortex could bring about, particularly when traveling at high velocities. Yet there was little I could do. According to my calculations, I would be making contact with the edge of the first vortex at around 11, and therefore hurriedly prepared lunch, not wanting to face the danger on an empty stomach. I had barely finished drying the last saucer when the rocket began to pitch and heave in every direction until all the objects not adequately tied down went flying from wall to wall like hail. With difficulty I crawled over to the armchair, and after I'd lashed myself to it, as the ship tossed about with ever-increasing violence, I noticed a sort of pale lilac haze forming on the opposite side of the cabin, and in the middle of it, between the sink and the stove, a misty human shape, which had on an apron and was pouring omelet batter into a frying pan. The shape looked at me with interest, but without surprise, then shimmered and was gone. I rubbed my eyes. I was obviously alone, so attributed the vision to a momentary aberration. As I continued to sit in, or rather jump along with the armchair, it suddenly hit me like a dazzling revelation that this hadn't been a hallucination at all. A thick volume of the general theory of relativity came whirling past my chair, and I grabbed for it, finally catching it on the 4th pass. Turning the pages of that heavy tome wasn't easy under the circumstances. Awesome forces hurled the rocket this way and that. It reeled like a drunken thing, but at last I found the right chapter. It spoke of the manifestation of the time loop, that is, the bending of the direction of the flow of time in the presence of gravitational fields of great intensity, which phenomena might even on occasion lead to the complete reversal of time and the duplication of the present. The vortex I had just entered was not one of the most powerful. I knew that if I could turn the ship's bow, even only a little, towards the galactic pole, it would intersect the so-called vortex gravitationis Pinker-Bacci, which had been observed more than once, in which had been observed more than once the duplication, even the triplication of the present. True, the controls were out, but I went down to the engine room and fiddled with the instruments so long that I actually managed to produce a slight deflection of the rocket towards the galactic pole. This took several hours. The results were beyond my expectations. The ship fell into the center of the vortex at around midnight. Its girders shook and groaned until I began to fear for its safety, but it emerged from the ordeal whole, and once again was wrapped in the lifeless arms of cosmic silence, whereupon I left the engine room, only to see myself sound asleep in bed. I realized at once that this was I of the previous day, that is, from Monday night. Without reflecting on the philosophical side of this rather singular event, I ran over and shook the sleeper by the shoulder, shouting for him to get up. Since I had no idea how long his Monday existence would last in my Tuesday one, therefore it was imperative we go outside and fix the rudder as quickly as possible together. But the sleeper merely opened one eye and told me not only that I was rude, but that I didn't exist, being a figment of his dream and nothing more. I tugged at him in vain, losing patience, and even attempted to drag him bodily from the bed. He wouldn't budge, stubbornly repeating that this was all a dream. I began to curse, but he pointed out logically that bolts tightened in dreams wouldn't hold on rudders in the sober light of day. I gave my word of honor that he was mistaken. I pleaded and swore in turn to no avail. Even the warts did not convince him. He turned his back to me and started snoring. I sat down in the armchair to collect my thoughts and take stock of the situation. I'd lived through it twice now, first as the sleeper on Monday, and then as the one trying to wake him unsuccessfully on Tuesday. The Monday me hadn't believed in the reality of the duplication, while the Tuesday me already knew it to be a fact. Here was a perfectly ordinary time loop. What then should be done in order to get the rudder fixed? Since the Monday me slept on, I remembered that on that night I had slept through to the morning undisturbed. I saw the futility of any further efforts to rouse him. The map indicated a number of other large gravitational vortices up ahead. Therefore, I could count on the duplication of the present within the next few days. I decided to write myself a letter and pin it to the pillow, enabling the Monday me, when he awoke, to see for himself that the dream had been no dream. But no sooner did I sit at the table with pen and paper than something started rattling in the engines, and so I hurried there and poured water on the overheated atomic pile until dawn, while the Monday me slept soundly, licking his lips from time to time, which galled me no end. Hungry and bleary-eyed, for I hadn't slept a wink, I set about making breakfast, and was just wiping the dishes when the rocket fell into the next gravitational vortex. I saw my Monday self staring at me dumbfounded, lashed to the armchair, while Tuesday I fried an omelet. Then a lurch knocked me off balance, everything grew dark, and I went down. I came to on the floor among bits of broken china. Near my face were the shoes of a man standing over me. "Get up," he said, lifting me. "Are you all right?" "I think so," I answered, keeping my hands on the floor, for my head was still spinning. "From what day of the week are you?" "Wednesday," he said. "Come on, let's get that rudder fixed while we still have a chance." "But where's the Monday me?" I asked. "Gone, which means, I suppose, that you are he." "How is that?" "Well, the Monday me on Monday night became Tuesday morning the Tuesday me, and so on." I don't understand." "Doesn't matter, you'll get the hang of it, but hurry up, we're wasting time." "Just a minute," I replied, remaining on the floor. "Today is Tuesday. Now, if you are the Wednesday me, and if by that time on Wednesday the rudder still hasn't been fixed, then it follows that something will prevent us from fixing it, since otherwise you on Wednesday would not now, on Tuesday, be asking me to help you fix it. Wouldn't it be best then for us not to risk going outside?" "Nonsense," he exclaimed. "Look, I'm the Wednesday me, and you're the Tuesday me, and as for the rocket, well, my guess is that its existence is patched, which means that in places it's Tuesday, in places it's Wednesday, and here and there perhaps it's even a little bit of Thursday. Time has simply become shuffled up in passing through these vortices. But why should that concern us when together we are two and therefore have a chance to fix the rudder?" "No, you're wrong," I said. "If on Wednesday, where you already are, having lived through Tuesday, so that now Tuesday is behind you, if on Wednesday, I repeat, the rudder isn't fixed, then one can only conclude that it didn't get fixed on Tuesday, since it's Tuesday now, and if we were to go and fix the rudder right away, that right away would be your yesterday, and there would now be nothing to fix, and consequently you're as stubborn as a mule," he growled. "You'll regret this, and my only consolation is that you too will be infuriated by your own pig-headedness, just as I am now, when you yourself reach Wednesday." "Ah, wait," I cried. "Do you mean that on Wednesday, I being you, will try to convince the Tuesday me just as you are doing here, except that everything will be reversed? In other words, you will be me and I you?" "But of course. That's what makes a time loop. Hold on, I'm coming. Yes, it makes sense now." But before I could get up off the floor, we fell into a new vortex, and the terrible acceleration flattened us against the ceiling. The dreadful pitching and heaving didn't let up once throughout that night from Tuesday to Wednesday. Then when things had finally quieted down a little, the volume of the general theory of relativity came flying across the cabin and hit me on the forehead with such force that I lost consciousness. When I opened my eyes, I saw broken dishes and a man sprawled among them. I immediately jumped to my feet and lifted him, shouting, "Get up! Are you all right?" "I think so," he replied, blinking. "From what day of the week are you?" "Wednesday," I said. "Come on, let's get that rudder fixed while we still have the chance." "But where's the Monday me?" he asked, sitting up. He had a black eye. "Gone," I said, "which means that you are he." "How is that?" "Well, the Monday me on Monday night became Tuesday morning, the Tuesday me, and so on." "I don't understand." "Doesn't matter, you'll get the hang of it, but hurry up, we're wasting time." Saying this, I was already looking around for the tools. "Just a minute," he drawled, not budging an inch. "Today is Tuesday. Now, if you are the Wednesday me, and if by that time on Wednesday the rudder still hasn't been fixed, then it follows that something will prevent us from fixing it, since otherwise you on Wednesday would not be asking me on Tuesday to help you fix it. Wouldn't it be best then for us not to risk going outside?" "Nonsense," I yelled, losing my temper. "Look, I'm the Wednesday me, you're the Tuesday me." And so we quarreled on opposite roles, during which he did in fact drive me into a positive fury, for he persistently refused to help me fix the rudder, and it did no good calling him pig-headed and a stubborn mule. And when at last I'd managed to convince him, we plunged into the next gravitational vortex. I was in a cold sweat, for the thought occurred to me that we might now go around and round in this time loop, repeating ourselves for all eternity. But luckily that didn't happen. By the time the acceleration had slackened enough for me to stand, I was alone once more in the cabin. Apparently the localized existence of Tuesday, which until now had persisted in the vicinity of the sink, had vanished, becoming a part of the irretrievable past. I rushed over to the map to find some nice vortex with which I could send the rocket, so as to bring about still another warp of time, and in that way obtain a helping hand. There was in fact one vortex quite promising too, and by manipulating the engines with great difficulty, I aimed the rocket to intersect it at the very center. True, the configuration of that vortex was, according to the map, rather unusual. It had two foci side by side, but by now I was too desperate to concern myself with this anomaly. After several hours of bustling about in the engine room, my hands were filthy, so I went to wash them, seeing as there was plenty of time yet before I would be entering the vortex. The bathroom was locked. From inside came the sounds of someone gargling. "Who's there?" I hollered, taken aback. "Me," replied a voice. "Which me is that?" "Ijon Tichy." "From what day?" "Friday. What do you want?" "I wanted to wash my hands," I said mechanically, thinking meanwhile with the greatest intensity it was Wednesday evening, and he came from Friday. Therefore the gravitational vortex into which the ship was to fall would bend time from Friday to Wednesday. But as for what then would take place within the vortex, that I could in no way picture. Particularly intriguing was the question of where the Thursday me might be. In the meantime, the Friday me still wasn't letting me into the bathroom, taking his sweet time, though I pounded on the door incessantly. "Stop that gargling," I roared, out of patience. "Every second is precious. Come out at once, and we have to fix the rudder." "For that you don't need me," he said phlegmatically from behind the door. "The Thursday me must be around here somewhere. Go with him." "What Thursday me? That's not possible." Where the Thursday me I ought to know whether it's possible or not, considering that I'm in Friday and consequently have lived through your Wednesday as well as his Thursday. Feeling dizzy, I jumped back from the door, for yes, I did hear some commotion in the cabin. A man was standing there, pulling the tool bag out from under the bed. "You're the Thursday me?" I cried, running into the room. "Right," he said. "Here, give me a hand." "Will we be able to fix the rudder this time?" I asked, as together we pulled out the heavy satchel. "I don't know. It wasn't fixed on Thursday. Ask the Friday me." That hadn't crossed my mind. I quickly ran back to the bathroom door. Hey there, Friday me. Has the rudder been fixed?" "Not on Friday," he replied. "Why not?" "This is why not," he said, opening the door. His head was wrapped in a towel, and he pressed the flat of a knife to his forehead, trying in this manner to reduce the swelling of a lump the size of an egg. The Thursday me, meanwhile, approached with the tools and stood beside me, calmly scrutinizing the me with the lump, who with his free hand was putting back on the shelf a siphon of seltzer. So that was its gurgle I had taken for his gargle. "Who gave you that?" I asked sympathetically. "Oh, what gave you that? Not what. Who?" he replied. "It was the Sunday me." "The Sunday me? But why? That can't be," I cried. "Well, it's a long story. Makes no difference. Quick, let's go outside. We might just make it," said the Thursday me, turning to the me that was I. "But the rocket will fall into the vortex any minute now," I replied. "The shock could throw us off into space, and that would be the end of us." "Use your head, stupid," snapped the Thursday me. "If the Friday me is alive, nothing can happen to us. Today is only Thursday." "It's Wednesday," I objected. "It makes no difference. In either case, I'll be alive on Friday, and so will you." "Yes, but there really aren't two of us. It only looks that way," I observed. "Actually, there is one of me just from different days of the week." "Fine. Now open the hatch." But it turned out here that we had only one spacesuit between us. Therefore, we could not both leave the rocket at the same time, and therefore our plan to fix the rudder was completely ruined. "Blast!" I cried, angrily throwing down the tool bag. "What I should have done is put on this spacesuit to begin with and kept it on. I just didn't think of it. But you, as the Thursday me, you ought to have remembered." "I had the spacesuit, but the Friday me took it," he said. "When? Why?" It's not worth going into," he shrugged, and turned around, went back to the cabin. The Friday me wasn't there. I looked in the bathroom, but it was empty too. "Where's the Friday me?" I asked, returning. The Thursday me methodically cracked an egg with a knife and poured its contents into the sizzling fat. "Somewhere in the neighborhood of Saturday, no doubt," he replied, indifferently, quickly scrambling the egg. "Excuse me," I protested, "but you already had your meals on Wednesday. What makes you think you can go and eat a second Wednesday supper?" "These rations are mine as much as they are yours," he said, calmly lifting the browned edge of the egg with his knife. "I am you, you are me, so it makes no difference." "What sophistry! Wait, that's too much butter. Are you crazy? I don't have enough food for this many people." The skillet flew out of his hand, and I went crashing into the wall. We had fallen into a new vortex. Once again the ship shook, as if in a fever, but my only thought was to get to the corridor where the spacesuit was hanging and put it on. For in that way, I reasoned, when Wednesday became Thursday, I, as the Thursday me, would be wearing the spacesuit. And if only I didn't take it off for a single minute, and I was determined not to, then I would obviously be wearing it on Friday also. And therefore, the me on Thursday and the me on Friday would both be in our spacesuits, so that when we came together in the same present, it would finally be possible to fix that miserable rudder. The increasing thrust of gravity made my head swim, and when I opened my eyes, I noticed that I was lying to the right of the Thursday me, and not to the left, as I had been a few moments before. Now, while it had been easy enough for me to develop this plan about the spacesuit, it was considerably more difficult to put it into action, since with the growing gravitation, I could hardly move. When it weakened just a little, I began to inch my way across the floor, in the direction of the door that led to the corridor. Meanwhile, I noticed that the Thursday me was likewise heading for the door, crawling on his belly to the corridor. At last, after about an hour, when the vortex had reached its widest point, we met at the threshold, both flattened to the floor. Then I thought, why should I have to strain myself to reach the handle? Let the Thursday me do it. Yet at the same time, I began to recall certain things which clearly indicated that it was I now who was the Thursday me, and not he. "What day of the week are you?" I asked, to make sure. With my chin pressed to the floor, I looked him in the eye. Struggling, he opened his mouth. "Thursday me," he groaned. Now that was odd. Could it be that, in spite of everything, I was still the Wednesday me? Calling to mind all my recollections of the recent past, I had to conclude that this was out of the question. So he must have been the Friday me, for if he had perceived me by a day before, then he was surely a day ahead now. I waited for him to open the door, but apparently he expected the same of me. The gravitation had now subsided noticeably, so I got up and ran to the corridor. Just as I grabbed the spacesuit, he tripped me, pulling it out of my hands, and I fell flat on my face. "You dog," I cried. "Tricking your own self. That's really low." He ignored me, stepping calmly into the spacesuit. The shamelessness of it was appalling. Suddenly a strange force threw him from the suit. As it turned out, somebody was already inside. For a moment I wavered, no longer knowing who was who. "You," Wednesday called the one in the spacesuit. "Hold back Thursday. Help me." For the Thursday me was indeed trying to tear the spacesuit off of him. "Give me the spacesuit," bellowed the Thursday me as he wrestled with the other. "Get off. What are you trying to do? Don't you realize I'm the one who should have it and not you?" howled the other. "And why is that, pray?" "For the reason, fool, that I'm closer to Saturday than you, and by Saturday there'll be two of us in suits." "But that's ridiculous," I said, getting into the argument. "At best you'll be alone in the suit on Saturday like an absolute idiot and won't be able to do a thing. Let me have the suit. If I put it on now, then you'll be wearing it on Friday as the Friday me, and I will also on Saturday as the Saturday me, and you can see there will then be two of us, and with two suits. Come on, Thursday, give me a hand." "Wait," protested the Friday me when I had forcibly yanked the spacesuit off his back. "In the first place, there is no one here for you to call Thursday, since midnight is past and you are now the Thursday me, and in the second place, it'll be better if I stay in the spacesuit. The spacesuit won't do you a bit of good." "Why not? If I put it on today, I'll have it on tomorrow too." "You'll see for yourself. After all, I was already you on Thursday, and my Thursday has passed, so I ought to." "Enough talk. Let go of this instant," I snarled, but he grabbed it from me and I chased him, first through the engine room and then into the cabin. It somehow worked out that there were only two of us now. Suddenly I understood why the Thursday me, when we were standing at the hatch with the tools, had told me that the Friday me took the spacesuit from him. For in the meantime, I myself had become the Thursday me, and there the Friday me was in fact taking it. But I had no intention of giving in that easily. "Just you wait," I thought. "I'll take care of you." And out I ran into the corridor, and from there into the engine room, where before, during the chase, I had noticed a heavy pipe lying on the floor, which served to stoke the atomic pile, and I picked it up, and thus armed, dashed back to the cabin. The other me was already in the spacesuit. He had pulled on everything but the helmet. "Out of the spacesuit," I snapped, clenching my pipe in a threatening manner. "Not a chance. Out, I say." Then I wondered whether or not I should hit him. It was a little disconcerting, the fact that he had neither a black eye nor a bump on his head, like the other Friday me, the one I'd found in the bathroom. But all at once I realized that this was the way it had to be. That Friday me by now was a Saturday me, yes, and perhaps even was knocking about somewhere in the vicinity of Sunday, while this Friday me inside the spacesuit had only recently been the Thursday me, into which same Thursday me I myself had been transfigured at midnight. Thus I was moving along the sloping curve of the time loop towards that place in which the Friday me before the beating would change into the Friday me already beaten. Well, he did say back then that it had been the Sunday me who did it, and there was no trace as yet of him. We stood alone in the cabin, he and I. Suddenly I had a brainstorm. "Out of that spacesuit," I growled. "Keep off, Thursday," he yelled. "I'm not Thursday. I'm the Sunday me," I shrieked, closing in for the kill. He tried to kick me, but spacesuit boots are very heavy, and before he could raise his leg, I let him have it over the head. Not too hard, of course, since I had grown sufficiently familiar with all of this to know that I, in turn, when eventually I went from Thursday to the Friday me, would be on the receiving end, and I wasn't particularly set on fracturing my own skull. The Friday me fell with a groan, holding his head, and I brutally tore the spacesuit off of him, while he made for the bathroom on wobbly legs, muttering, "Where's the cotton? Where's the seltzer?" I quickly began to don the suit that we had struggled over, until I noticed, sticking out from under the bed, a human foot. I took a closer look, kneeling. Under the bed lay a man, trying to muffle the sound of his chewing. He was hurriedly bolting down the last bar of the milk chocolate I had stored away in the suitcase for a rainy sidereal day. The bastard was in such a hurry that he ate the chocolate along with bits of tin foil, which glittered on his lips. "Leave that chocolate alone," I yelled, pulling at his foot. "Who are you, anyway? The Thursday me?" I added in a lower voice, seized by a sudden doubt, for the thought occurred to me that maybe I already was the Friday me and would soon have to collect what I had dished out early to the same. "The Sunday me," he mumbled, his mouth full. I felt weak. Now either he was lying, in which case there was nothing to worry about, or telling the truth, and if he was, I faced a clobbering for sure, because the Sunday me, after all, was the one who had hit the Friday me. The Friday me told me so himself before it happened, and then later I, impersonating the Sunday me, had let him have it with the pipe. But on the other hand, I said to myself, even if he's lying and not the Sunday me, it's still quite possible that he's a later me than me, and if he is a later me, he remembers everything that I do, therefore already knows that I lied to the Friday me, and so could deceive me in a similar manner, since what had been a spur-of-the-moment stratagem on my part was for him by now simply a memory he could easily make use of. Meanwhile, as I remained in uncertainty, he had eaten the rest of the chocolate and crawled out from under the bed. "If you're the Sunday me, where's your spacesuit?" I cried, struck by a new thought. "I'll have it in a minute," he said calmly, and then I noticed the pipe in his hand. The next thing I saw was a bright flash, like a few dozen supernovas going on at once, after which I lost consciousness. I came to sitting on the floor of the bathroom. Someone was banging on the door. I began to attend to my bruises and bumps, but he kept pounding. It turned out to be the Wednesday me. After a while, I showed him my battered head. He went with the Thursday me for the tools, and then there was a lot of running around and yanking off of spacesuits. This, too, in one way or another, I managed to live through, and on Saturday morning crawled under the bed to see if there wasn't some chocolate left in the suitcase. Someone started pulling on my foot as I ate the last bar, which I'd found underneath the shirts. I no longer knew just who this was, but hit him over the head anyhow, pulling the spacesuit off of me, and was going to put it on when the rocket fell into the next vortex. When I regained consciousness, the cabin was packed with people. There was barely elbow room. As it turned out, they were all of them me, from different days, weeks, months, and one who said he was even from the following year. There were plenty with bruises and black eyes, and 5 among those present had on spacesuits. But instead of immediately going out through the hatch and repairing the damage, they began to quarrel, argue, bicker, and debate. The problem was who had hit whom and when. The situation was complicated by the fact that there now had appeared morning me's and afternoon me's. I feared that if things went on like this, I would soon be broken into minutes and seconds, and then, too, the majority of the me's present were lying like mad, and so to this day I'm not altogether sure who I hit and who hit me when that whole business took place, triangularly between the Thursday, the Friday, and the Wednesday me's, all of whom I was in turn. My impression is that because I had lied to the Friday me, pretending to be the Sunday me, I ended up with 1 blow more than I should have, going by the calendar. But I would prefer not to dwell any longer on these unpleasant memories. A man who, for an entire week, does nothing but hit himself over the head has little reason to be proud. Meanwhile, the arguments continued. The sight of such inaction, such wasting of precious time, drove me to despair, while the rocket rushed blindly on, straight ahead, plunging every now and then into another gravitational vortex. At last, the ones wearing spacesuits started slugging it out with the ones who were not. I tried to introduce some sort of order into that absolute chaos, and finally, after superhuman efforts, succeeded in organizing something that resembled a meeting, in which the one from next year, having seniority, was elected chairman by acclamation. We then appointed an elective committee, a nominating committee, and a committee for new business, and 4 of us from next month were made sergeants at arms. But in the meantime, we had passed through a negative vortex, which cut our number in half, so that on the very first ballot, we lacked a quorum, and had to change the bylaws before proceeding to vote on the candidates for rudder repairer. The map indicated the approach of still other vortices, and these undid all that we had accomplished so far. First, the candidates already chosen disappeared, and then the Tuesday me showed up with the Friday me, who had his head wrapped in a towel, and they created a shameful scene. Upon passage through a particularly strong positive vortex, we hardly fit in the cabin and corridor. and opening the hatch was out of the question. There simply wasn't room. But the worst of it was these time displacements were increasing in amplitude. A few gray-haired me's had already appeared, and here and there I even caught glimpses of the close-cropped heads of children. That is, of myself, of course, or rather, myselves from the halcyon days of boyhood. I really can't recall whether I was still the Sunday me or had already turned into the Monday me. Not that it made any difference. The children sobbed that they were being squashed in the crowd and called for their mommy. The chairman, the Titchy from next year, let out a string of curses because the Wednesday me, who had crawled under the bed in a futile search for chocolate, bit him on the leg when he accidentally stepped on the latter's finger. I saw that all this would end badly, particularly now, as here and there graybeards were turning up. Between the 142nd and 143rd vortices, I passed around an attendance sheet, but afterwards it came to light that a large number of those present were cheating, supplying false vital statistics. God knows why. Perhaps the prevailing atmosphere had muddled their wits. The noise and confusion were such that you could hardly make yourself understood only by screaming at the top of your lungs. But then one of last year's Ejans hit upon what seemed to be an excellent idea. Namely, that the oldest among us tell us the story of his life. In that way we would learn just who was supposed to fix the rudder. For obviously the oldest me contained within his past experience the lives of all the others here from their various months, days, and years. So we turned in this matter to a hoary old gentleman who, slightly palsied, was standing idly in the corner. When questioned, he began to speak at great length of his children and grandchildren, then passed to his cosmic voyages that he had embarked upon, no end of these in the course of his 90-some years. Of the one now taking place, the only one of interest to us, the old man had no recollection whatever, owing to his generally scaloric and overexcited condition. However, he was far too proud to admit this, and went on evasively, obstinately, time again returning to his high connections, decorations, and grandchildren, until finally we shouted him down and ordered him to hold his tongue. The next two vortices cruelly thinned our ranks. After the third, not only was there more room, but all of those in spacesuits had disappeared as well. One empty suit remained. We voted to hang it up in the corridor, then went back to our deliberations. There, following another shuffle for the possession of that precious garment, a new vortex came along, and suddenly the place was deserted. I was sitting on the floor, puffy-eyed, in my strangely spacious cabin, surrounded by broken furniture, strips of clothing, ripped-up books. The floor was strewn with ballots. According to the map, I had now passed through the entire zone of gravitational vortices, no longer able to count on duplication, and thus no longer able to correct the damage. I fell into numb despair. About an hour later, I looked out in the corridor and discovered, to my great surprise, that the spacesuit was missing. But then I vaguely recalled, yes, right before that last vortex, two little boys sneaked out into the corridor. Could they have possibly both of them put on one spacesuit? Struck by a sudden thought, I ran to the controls. The rudder worked! So then, those little tykes had fixed it after all, while we adults were stuck in endless disagreements. I imagined that one of them placed his arms in the sleeves of the suit and the other in the pants. That way they could have tightened the nut and bolt with wrenches at the same time, working on either side of the rudder. The empty spacesuit I found in the airlock behind the hatch. I carried it inside the rocket like a sacred relic, my heart full of boundless gratitude for those brave lads I had been so long ago, and thus concluded what was surely one of my most unusual adventures. I reached my destination safely, thanks to the courage and resourcefulness I had displayed when only 2 children. It was said afterwards that I had invented the whole thing, and those more malicious even went so far as to insinuate that I had a weakness for alcohol, carefully concealed on Earth but freely indulged during these long and lonely cosmic flights. Lord only knows what other gossip has been circulating on the subject, but that is how people are. They willingly give credence to the most far-fetched drivel, but not to the simple truth, which is precisely what I have presented here. The end.
So yeah, I can't even. I was gonna try to keep track for a while, but I lost complete count.
Well, it's on the hitting of the heads that I think it got out of whack.
There's that's one story in the book. Is a whole book like that, or is that an anthology? Or
It's a bunch of stories. Yeah, many of them very funny, but that is my favorite one from that book.
that's awesome. Well, thank you, kind sir. And Mr. Lorrey.
So, Mike, you have a really short story to tell us?
Not sure if this is really short, but it's the shortest one I got. So, we're gonna
here all night.
Yeah, we're gonna do The Great Simoleon Caper by Neil Stevenson, published in Time magazine in 1995. So it can't have been that long if it was published in a magazine. Okay, so I'll avoid all the pretext that this is set in basically it's a prequel to Snow Crash, which is what Second Life is based on, and it's set in time between Cryptonomicon and Snow Crash, and helps explain connections between the two and how the post-federal world of Snow Crash came to be. So here we go. It's hard to imagine a less attractive lifestyle for a young man just out of college than going back to business, unless it's living with his brother in the suburbs of Chicago, which naturally is what I did. Mom at least bakes a mean cherry pie. Joe, on the other hand, got me into a permanent emotional headlock and found some way every day to give me psychic noogies. For example, there was a day he gave me the job of figuring out how many jelly beans it would take to fill up Soldier Field. Let us stipulate that it's all my fault. Joe would want me to be clear on that point, since he was always good with people, and I was always good with numbers. As Joe tells me, at least once a week I should have studied engineering. I drifted between majors instead, ended up with a major in math and a minor in art, just about the worst thing you can put on a job app. Joe, on the other hand, went into the ad game when the internet and optical fiber and HDTV and digital cash all came together and turned into what we now call the metaverse. Most of the big ad agencies got hammered, because in the metaverse you can actually whip out a gun and blow the Energizer Buddy's head off. A lot of people did. Joe borrowed $10,000 from mom and dad and started this clever young ad agency. If you've ever spent any time crawling the metaverse, you've seen his work, and it's seen you and talked to you and followed you around. Mom and dad stayed in their little house in Bismarck, North Dakota. None of their neighbors guessed that if they cashed their stock in Joe's agency, they'd be worth about $20 million. I nagged them to diversify their portfolio, buy a bushel basket of Cougarans and bury them in the backyard, or maybe a few million into a mutual fund. But Mom and Dad felt this would be a no-confidence vote in Joe. It'd be, Dad said, like showing up for your kid's piano recital with a Walkman. Joe comes home one January evening with a magnum of champagne. After giving me the obligatory hazing about whether I'm old enough to drink, he pours me a glass. He's already banished his two sons to the home theater. They've cranked up this set-top box they got for Christmas. Patch this baby into your HD TV, and you can cruise the metaverse, wander the web, and choose from among several user-friendly operating systems, each one rife with automatic help systems, customer service, hotlines, and intelligent agents. The theater's subwoofer causes our silverware to buzz around like sheet metal hockey players, and amplified explosions knock swirling nebulas of tiny bubbles loose from the insides of our champagne glasses. These low frequencies must penetrate the young brain somehow, coming in under the kid's media hip radar and injecting the edfo in educational mucho media bit stream direct into their cerebral cortices. Hauled down a modern account today, Joe explains. We hype cars, we hype computers, we hype athletic shoes, but as of 3 hours ago, we are hyping a currency. What? Says his wife Ann. You know, like dollars or yen, except this is a new currency. From which country, I ask? This is like offering locks to a dog. I've given Joe the chance to enlighten his feckless bro. He hammers back half a flute of Dom Perignon and shifts into full-on pitch mode. Forget about countries, he says. We're talking simoleons, the smart, if new currency of the metaverse. Is this like e-money, Ann asks. We've been doing e-money for eons, ever since the automated teller machines, Joe says, with just the right edge of scorn. Nowadays we can use it to go shopping in the metaverse, but it's still in US dollars. Smart people are looking for something better. That was for me. I graduated college with $1,000 in savings. With inflation at 10% and rising, that buys a lot fewer Lincoln Kugels than it did a year ago. The government's never going to get its act together on the budget, Joe says. It can't. Inflation will just get worse. People would put their money elsewhere. Inflation will just have to get pretty darn high before I put my money into some artificial currency, I say. Hell, they're all artificial, Joe says. If you think about it, we've been doing this forever. We put our money in stocks, bonds, shares, and mutual funds. Those things represent real assets. Factory, ships, bananas, software, gold, whatever. Simoleons is just a new name for those assets. You carry around a smart card and spend it just like cash, or else you go shopping in the metaverse and spend the money online, and the goods show up at your doorstep the next morning. I say, who's going to fall for that? Everyone, he says. For our big promo, we're going to give simoleons away to some average Joes at the Super Bowl. We'll check in with them 1, 3, 6 months later, and people see that this is a safe and stable place to put their money. It doesn't inspire much confidence, I say, to hand out stuff like Monopoly money. He's ready for this one. It's not a handout, it's a sweepstakes. And that's when he asked me to calculate how many jelly beans will be in Soldier Field, will fill Soldier Field. 2 hours later, I'm down at the local Galaxy-class grocery store in bulk, a Manhattan of towering lucite bins filled with steel-cut rolled oats, off-brand Fruit Loops, sun-dried tomatoes, prefabricated s'mores, macadamias, French toast roasts, and pignolias, and all dispensed into your bag or bucket with a jerk at the handy plexiglass guillotine. Not a human being in sight, just robot restocking machines trundling back and forth on a grid of overhead catwalks and surveillance cameras hidden in smoke glass hemispheres. I stroll through the gleaming lucite wonderland, holding a perfect 6-inch cube improvised from duct tape and cardboard. I stagger through a glitter of gulch of gummy fauna, Boston baked beans, gobstoppers, good and plenty, tart and tiny, then bingo, bulk jelly beans, premium grade. I put my cube under the spout and fill it. Who guesses closest and earliest on the jelly beans wins the simoleons. They've hired a big 6 accounting firm to make sure everything is done right, and since they can't actually fill the stadium with candy, have to come up with the correct answer in capital letters and supply it to them, and just as important, to keep it secret. I get home and count the beans. 3,101. Multiply it by 8 to get the number in a cubic foot. 24,808. Now I just need to know the number of cubic feet in Soldier Field. My nephews are sprawled like pithed frogs before the HDTV, teaching themselves physics by lobbing antimatter bombs into an offending civilization from high orbit. I prance over the black zigzags of the control cables and commandery unit. Up on the screen, a cartoon elf or sprite or something pokes its head out from behind a window and then draws it back. No, I'm not a paranoid schizophrenic. This is the much-hyped intelligent agent who comes with the box. I ignore it, make my escape from Game Land, and blunder into a lurid district of the metaverse where thousands of infomercials run day and night, each in its own window. I watch an ad for Chinese folks medicines made from rare animal parts genetically engineered and grown in vats. Grizzly bear gallbladders are shown growing like bunches of grapes in amber fluid. The animated sprite comes all the way out, leans up against the edge of the infomercial window and says, "Hey," in a goofy, exuberant voice, "I'm Raster. Just speak my name. It's Raster if you can need any help." I don't like Raster's looks. It's likely he was wandering up the streets of Toontown and waving a sign saying, "Will annoy grown-ups for food," until he was hired by the cable company. He begins flying around the screen, leaving a trail of glowing fairy dust that fades much too slowly for my taste. "Give me the damn encyclopedia," I shout. Hearing the dread word, my nephews erupt from the rug and flee. So I look up Soldier Field. My old analytic geometry textbook, still flecked with insulation from the attic, has been sitting on my thigh like a lump of ice. By combining some formulas with the encyclopedia's stats. Hey, Raster. Raster is so glad to be wanted. It does figure eights around the screen. "Calculator," I shout. "No need, boss. Simply tell me your desired calculation and I'll do it in my head." So I have a most tedious conversation with Raster in which I estimate the number of cubic feet in the solar field, rounded to the nearest foot. I asked Raster to multiply that by 24,808, and he shoots back 167,717. A non-geek wouldn't have thought twice, but I say, "Raster, you have spam for brains. It should be an exact multiple of 8. Evidently, my brother's new box came with one of those defective chips that makes errors when numbers get really big. Raster slaps himself upside the head. Loose screws and transistors tumble out his ears. "Darn, guess I'll have a talk with my programmer," and then he freezes up for a minute. My sister-in-law, Anne, darts into the room, hunched in a don't-mind-me posture, and looks around. She's terrified that I might have a date in here. "Who are you talking to?" "This goofy IA that came with your box. Don't ever use it to do your taxes, by the way." She cocks her head. "You know, just yesterday I asked for help with Schedule B, and it gave me a recipe for shellfish bisque." "Good evening, sir. Good evening, ma'am. What are those numbers again?" Raster asks. Same voice, but different inflection. More human. I call out the numbers one more time, and he comes back with 537,824,167,720. "That sounds better," I mutter. Nan is nonplussed. Now, its voice recognition seems to be working fine. I said, "I don't think so. I think my little math program just got forwarded to a real human being. When the conversation gets over its head, the head of the built-in software, it calls for help, and a human steps in and takes over. He's watching us through the built-in video cam," I explained, pointing at the fisheye lens built into the front panel of the set-top box, "and listening in through the built-in mic." Anne's getting that glazed look on her eyes. I grope for an analog analogy. "Remember The Exorcist? Well, Raster has just been possessed. Like the chick in the flick, except it's not just Beelzebub, it's a customer service rep. I just walked into a trap that is yawningly obvious to Anne. She says, "Maybe that's the job you should apply for." The other jaw of the trap closes faster than my teeth chomping down on my tongue. "I can take your application online right now," says Raster. My sister-in-law is the embodiment of sugary triumph until the next evening when I have a good news, bad news conversation with her. Good, I'm now a Metaverse customer service rep. Bad, I don't have a cubicle in some edge city office complex. I telecommute from home, from her sofa. I sit there all day long, munching through my dwindling stash of tax-deductible jelly beans, wearing an operator's headset, gripping the control unit, and using it like a puppeteer's rig to control other people's rasters on other people's screens. All over the U.S. I can see them. The wide-angle view from their set-top boxes is piped into a window on my screen. But they can't see me, just Raster, my avatar, my body in the metaverse. Ghastly in the mottled, flattening light of the tube, people ask the inane questions about arithmetic. If they're asking for help with recipes, airplane schedules, child rearing, or home improvement, they've been turfed and sent to someone else. My experience is pure math only. Which is pretty sleepy until the next week when my brother's agency announces the big SIMOLEON sweepstakes. They've hired a knock-kneed fullback as their spokesman. Within minutes, requests for help from contestants start flooding in. Every Bears fan in greater Chicago is trying to calculate the volume of Soldier Field. They're all doing it wrong, and even the ones who are doing it right are probably using the faulty chip in their set-top box. I'm in deep conflict of interest territory here, wanting to reach out with Raster's stubby, white-gloved, three-fingered hand and slap some sense into these people, but I'm sworn to secrecy. Drew has hired me to do the calculations for the Metrodome, Three River Stadium, RFK Stadium, and every other NFL venue. There's going to be a Simoleons winner in every city. We're allowed to take 15-minute breaks every 4 hours, so I crank up the home theater just to blow the carbon out of its cylinders and zip down the main street of the metaverse to a club that specializes in my kind of tunes. I'm still wearing my Raster uniform, but I don't care. I'm just one of thousands of Rasters running up and down the street on their breaks. My club has a narrow entrance and a narrow alley off a narrow side street, far from the virtual malls and 3D video game amusement parks that serve as the cash cows for the metaverse's e-money economy. Inside, there's a few Rasters on break, but it's mostly people wearing more creative avatars in the metaverse. There's no part of your virtual body you can't pierce, brand, or tattoo in an effort to look weirder than the next guy. We all know how that looks. The live band on stage, jacked in from a studio in Prague, isn't very good, so I duck into the back room where there are virtual racks full of tapes you can sample, listening to a few seconds from each song. If you like it, you can download the whole album with optional interactive liner notes, videos, and sheet music. I'm pawing through one of these racks when I sense another avatar, something big and shaggy, sidling up next to me. It mumbles something. I ignore it. A magisterial throat-clearing noise rumbles in the subwoofer, cackles the surround speakers, punches through cleanly in the center channel above the screen. I turn and look. It's a heavy-set creature wearing a t-shirt emblazoned with the logo Hackers 1111. It has very long scythe-like claws, which it uses to grip a hot pink cylinder. It's much better drawn than Raster, almost Disney quality. The sloth speaks 537,824,167,720. Hey, I shout, who the hell are you? It lifts the pink cylinder to its lips and drinks. It's a can of Jolt. Where'd you get that number, I demand? It's supposed to be a secret. The key is under the doormat, the sloth says, and then turns around and walks out of the club. My 15-minute break is over, so I have to ponder the meaning of this through the rest of my shift. Then I drag myself up out of the couch, open the front door, and peel up the doormat. Sure enough, someone has stuck an envelope under there. Inside is a sheet of paper with a number on it written in hexadecimal notation, which is what computer people use. 0A567781 6BE2 2004-89FF 9001 C782, and so on for about 5 lines. The sloth had told me that the key is under the doormat, and I'm willing to bet many simoleons that this number is an encryption key that will enable me to send and receive coded messages. So I spend 10 minutes punching it into the set-top box. Bother me. Can I help you with anything? By the time I punch through the 256 digit, I become a little testy. With Raster said some rude things to him. I'm not proud of it. Then I hear something that's music to my ears. I'm sorry, I didn't understand you, Raster chirps. Please check your cable connections. I'm getting some noise on the line. A second figure materializes on the screen like a digital genie. It's the sloth again. Who the hell are you, I ask. The sloth takes another slug of Jolt, stifles a belch, and says, I'm Codex, the crypto-anarchist sloth. Your equipment requires maintenance, Raster says. Please contact the cable company. Your equipment is fine, Codex says. I'm encrypting your back channel to the cable company. It looks like noise. As he figured out, that number is your personal encryption key. No government or corporation on Earth can eavesdrop on us now. Gosh, thanks, I say. You're welcome, Codex replies. Now, let's get down to biz. We have something you want, you have something we want. How did you know the answer to the Soldier Field jellybean question? We've got all 27, Codex says, and he rattles off the secret numbers for Candlestick Park, the Kingdome, the Meadowlands, etc. Unless you've broken into the accounting firm's vault, I say, there's only one way you could have those numbers. You've been eavesdropping on my little chats with Raster. You've tapped the line coming out of the set-top box, haven't you? Oh, that's typical. I suppose you think we're a bunch of socially inept acne-ridden, high IQ teenage hackers who play sophomore pranks on the establishment. The thought had crossed my mind, I said, but the fact that the cartoon sloth can give me such a realistic, withering look as he's doing now suggests a much higher level of technical sophistication. Raster only has 6 facial expressions, and none of them is very good. Your brother runs an ad agency, no? Correct. He recently signed up Simoleons Corp. Correct. As soon as he did, the government put your house under full-time surveillance. Suddenly, the glass eyeball in front of the set-top box is looking very big and beady at me. They tapped our infotainment cable? Didn't have to. The cable people are happy to do all the dirty work. After all, they're beholden to the government for their monopoly. So all these calculations you did using raster were piped straight to the cable company, from there to the government. We've got a mole in the government who CC'd us everything through an anonymous remailer in Jyväskylä, Finland. Why should the government care? They care big time, Codex says. They're going to destroy Simoleons, and they're going to step up all over your family in the process. Why? Because if they don't destroy E-money will destroy them. The next afternoon, I show up at my brother's office in a groovily refurbished ex-power plant on the near west side. He finishes rolling some calls and then waves me into his office, a cavernous space with a giant steam turbine as a conversational piece. I think it's supposed to be an irony thing. Aren't you supposed to be cruising the highway for stalled motorists, he says. Spare me the fraternal heckling, I say. We crypto-anarchists don't have time for such things. Crypto-anarchists? The word panarchist is also frequently used. Cute, he says, rolling the word around in his head. He's already working up a mental ad campaign for it. You're looking flushed and satisfied this afternoon, I said. Must have been those 2 imperial pints of Hog City Porter you had with your baby back ribs at Divan's Lakeview Grill. Suddenly he sits up straight and gets an edgy look about him as if a practical joke is in progress. He's determined not to play the fool. So how'd you know what I had for lunch? Same way I know you've been cheating on your taxes. What? Last year you put a new tax-deductible sofa in your home office, but the sofa is a hide-a-bed model, which is a no-no. Hackers, he says. Your buddies hacked into my records, didn't they? So you win the Stratolounger. I thought they had safeguards against those things now. The files are harder to break into, but every time information gets sent across the wires, like when Anne uses raster to do the taxes, it can be captured and decrypted. Because, my brother, you bought the default data security agreement with your box, and the default agreement sucks. So what are you getting at? For that, I say, we'll have to go someplace that isn't under surveillance. Surveillance? What the? He begins, and then I nod at the TV in the corner of his office, with its beady glass eyes staring out at us from the set-top box. We end up walking along the lake shore, which in Chicago in January is madness. But we hail from North Dakota, and we have all the cold weather gear it takes to do this. I tell him about Raster and the cable company. Oh, Jesus, he says, you mean those numbers aren't secret? Not even close. They've been out in the hands of 27 stooges hired by the government. The stooges have already FedExed their entry forms with the correct numbers, so as of now, all of your Simoleons, 27 million work, are going straight into the hands of the stooges on Super Bowl Sunday. And they will turn out to be your worst public relations nightmare. They will cash in their Simoleons for comic books and baseball cards and claim it safer. They'll intentionally go bankrupt and blame it on you. They'll show up in 2s and 3s on tawdry talk shows and report mysterious disappearances of their Simoleons during metaverse transactions. They will, in short, destroy the image and the business of your client. The result, victory for the government, which hates and fears private currencies, and bankruptcy for you and for mom and dad. How do you figure? Your agency is responsible for screwing up this sweepstakes. As soon as the debacle hits, your stock plummets, and mom and dad lose millions of their paper profits they've never had a chance to enjoy. Then your big shareholders will sue your ass, my brother, and you will lose. You gambled the value of the company on the faulty data security built into your set-top box, and you as a corporate officer are personally responsible for those losses. At this point, Big Brother Joe feels the need to slam himself down on a park bench, which must feel roughly like sitting on a block of dry ice, but he doesn't care. He's beyond physical pain. I sort of expected to feel triumphant at this point, but I don't. So I let him off the hook. I just came from your accounting firm, I say. I told them I discovered an error in my calculations, that my set-top box had a faulty chip. I supplied them with 27 new numbers, which I worked out by hand with pencil and paper in a conference room in their office, far from prying eyes of the cable company. I personally sealed them in an envelope and placed them in their vault. So the sweepstakes will come off as planned, seals? Thank God. Yeah, and while you're at it, thank me and the Panarchists, I shoot back. I also called Mom and Dad and told them that they should sell their stock just in case the government finds some new way to sabotage your contest. That's probably wise, he says sourly, but they're going to get hammered on taxes. They'll lose 40% of their net worth in the government, just like that. No, they won't, I say. They aren't paying any taxes. Say what? He lifts his chin off his mitts for the first time in a while, reinvigorated by the chance to tell me how wrong I am. The cash basis is only $10,000. You think the IRS won't notice $20 million in capital gains? We didn't invite the IRS. It's none of the IRS's damn business. They have means to make it their business. Not anymore. Mom and Dad aren't selling their stock for dollars, Joe. Simoleons, it's the same deal as simoleons. Everything gets reported to the government. Forget simoleons. Think crypto credits. Crypto credits? What the hell is a crypto credit? He stands up and starts pacing back and forth. Now he's convinced I've traded the family cow for a handful of magic beans. It's what simoleons ought to be. E-money that is totally private from the eyes of government. How do you know? Isn't any code crackable? Any kind of e-money consists of numbers moving around on wires, I say. If you know how to keep your numbers secret, your currency is safe. If you don't, it's not. Keeping numbers secret is a problem of cryptography, a branch of mathematics. Well, Joe, the crypto-anarchists showed me their math, and it's good math. It's better than the math the government uses. Better than Simoleon's math, too. No one can mess with crypto credits. He heaves a sigh. Okay. You want me to say it? I'll say it. You were right. I was wrong. You studied the right thing in college, after all. I'm not worthless scum? Not worthless scum. So, what do these crypto-anarchists want anyway? For some reason, I can't lie to my parents, but Joe's easy. Nothing, I say. They just wanted to do us a favor as a way of gaining some goodwill with us. And furthering the righteous cause of world panarchy? Something like that. Which brings us up to Super Bowl Sunday. We're sitting in a skybox high up in the Superdome, complete with a wet bar, kitchen, waiters, a big screen TVs on the walls, and to watch the instant replays of what we've just seen with our own naked, pitiful, non-digital eyes. The corporate offices of Simoleons are there. I start sounding them out on their cryptographic protocols, and it becomes clear that these people can't calculate their gas mileage without consulting raster, much less navigate the subtle and dangerous currents of cutting-edge cryptography. A Superdome security man comes in, looking uneasy. Some gentlemen are here, he says. They have tickets that appear to be authentic. It's three guys. First one is a 300-pounder with hair down to his waist and a beard down to his navel. He must be a Bears fan because he has painted his face and bare torso blue and orange. The second one isn't quite as introverted as the first, and the third isn't quite the button-down conformist that the other two are. Mr. Big is carrying an old milk crate. What's inside must be heavy because it looks like he's about to pull his arms out of his sockets. The Groot, he says, staggers into the room. Heads turned towards my mom and dad, who, alarmed by the appearance of these three, have declined to identify themselves. The guy makes for them and slams the crate down in front of my dad. I'm the guy you've known as Codex. Thanks for naming us as your broker. If Joe wasn't a rowing machine abuser, he'd be blowing aneurysms in both hemispheres about now. Your broker is a half-naked blue and orange crypto-anarchist? Dad devotes 30 seconds or so lighting his pipe. Down in the field, the 2-minute warning sounds. Dad puffs a cloud of smoke and says, he seemed to be an honest sloth. Just in case, Mom says, we sold half the stock through our broker in Bismarck. He says we'll have to pay taxes on that. We transferred the other half offshore to Mr. Codex here, and he converted it into the local currency tax-free. Offshore? Where? The Bahamas, Joe asks. The first distributed republic, says the big panarchist. It's a virtual nation-state. I'm the Minister of Data Security. Our official currency is crypto credits. What the hell good is that, Joe says. That was my concern too, Dad says. So just as an experiment, I use my crypto credits to buy something a little more tangible. Dad reaches into the milk crate and heaves out a rectangular object made of yellow metal. Mom hauls another one out. She and Dad begin lining them up on the counter, like King and Queen Midas unloading a carton of Twinkies. It takes Joe a few seconds to realize what's happening. He picks up one of the gold bars and gapes at it. The SIMOLEON execs crowd around and inspect the booty. Now you see why the government wants to stamp us out, the big guy says. We can do what they do, and cheaper and better. For the first time, light dawns on the face of the SIMOLEON CEO. Wait a sec, he says, and puts his hands to his temples. You can rig it so the people who use e-money don't have to pay taxes to any government ever? You got it, the big panarchist says. The horn sounds, announcing the end of the first half. I have to go down and give away some simoleons, the CEO says, but after that, you and I need to have a talk. The CEO goes down in the elevator with my brother, carrying a box of 27 smart cards, each of which is loaded with the secret numbers that make it worth 1 million simoleons. I go over and look out the skybox window. 27 Americans are congregated down on the 50-yard line, waiting for their mathematical manna to descend from heaven. They're just the demographic cross-section that my brother was hoping for. You'd never have guessed they were all secretly citizens of the first distributed republic. The crypto-anarchists grab some jolt from the wet bar and troop out. So now it's just me, Mom, and Dad in the skybox. Dad points at the field with the stem of his pipe. Those 27 folks down there, he says. They didn't get any help from you, did they? I've lied about this successfully to Joe, but I know it won't work with Mom and Dad. Let's just put it this way, I say. Not all panarchists are long-haired, jolt-slurping maniacs. Some of them look like you, exactly like you, as a matter of fact. Dad nods. I've got him on that one. Codex and his people saved the contest and our family from disaster, but there was a quid pro quo. Usually is, Dad says. But it's good for everyone. What Joe wants, and what his client wants, is for the promotion to go well, so that a year from now, everybody who's watching this broadcast today will have a high opinion of the safety and stability of simoleons, right? Right? If you give the simoleons away at random, you're rolling the dice. But if you give it to people who are secretly panarchists, who have a vested interest in showing that e-money works, it's a much safer bet. Does the First Distributed Republic have a flag, Mom asks, out of left field. I tell her these guys look like sewing enthusiasts. So even before the second half starts, she sketched out a flag on the back of her program. It'll be very colorful, she says, like a jar of jelly beans. The end.
Wow. And here we are. And what year is that? That was before Snow Crash. That was a while ago.
Well, this story was published in 1995. I believe Snow Crash was published in 1992, and Kryptonomicon was published in the mid 90s as well. Thank you. And so they form a trilogy between those novels, and the third novel is the Diamond Age. And so the Simoleon Caper sort of glues things together, because the First Distributed Republic is one of the internet governments in the Diamond Age, and it was founded by the main characters in Kryptonomicon, who recovered a huge hoard of the Yamashita's gold that was stashed in the jungles of the Philippines at the end of World War II. And they used that gold to found the First Distributed Republic and create the crypto credits. And so the idea here is that the crypto credits enable everybody to avoid income taxes, which starves the federal government of tax income, and which causes the US dollar to hyperinflate, and the government has to sell off all its assets to pay off its debts. And this is how basically we wind up where, for instance, there is the CIC. It becomes is a corporation that is a spin-off combining the Library of Congress and the CIA, and there's the Navy has to sell off its aircraft carriers and so on and so forth. So the world of snow crash is very post-federal. It's what we call a anarcho-capitalist society where essentially you can be a citizen of McDonald's or a citizen of whatever home ownership association you belong to, and so on and so forth. And so it's a very polycentric. We call it a polycentric legal system in libertarian legal theory.